Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tarnished Bronze. We're going to be looking into the Cult Comics Corner today, a little bit off the beaten track and a little bit more contemporary. Today's issue that we're going to be examining is Vacuum Decay number 7. Now, Vacuum Decay is an anthology series and it is edited and curated by Harry Nordlinger. And it's been going, I think, since 2022. I have all the issues, but we're going to be looking at issue 7 here today. And I first kind of got in touch with it through the Manga Chat guys. So that is Simon Hanselman and Josh Pettinger. And they sort of went through some of the issues, and I kind of liked the storyline. And so that's how I ended up getting into it. And it also was featured on the Comics Journal website. So the Comics Journal is a little bit hit and miss these days, but definitely it does give you at least some exposure to both some pretentious stuff and some good stuff, and some stuff that is both good and pretentious, which is maybe the best thing. And so here we've got stories by Nick Ruby, Gyro Lantiga, Carmichael, Keenan Marshall Keller, Michael Folotico, Harry Nordlinger, and David Enos. And I must apologize, I'm probably getting all of these names wrong, but the frontispiece here gives you some indication of the kind of the material that you'll be getting. Um, and actually, I must admit, one of my favorite cartoonists of recent times, Jasper Jubinville of Dynamite Diva fame, I was first exposed to that in Vacuum Decay. And so, yeah, highly recommend giving it a try if you see it at the local funny bookstore, or if you manage to get on the Vacuum Decay website. I think you can buy them at your online outlets. And I will admit that the because it's an anthology, it's obviously a little bit uneven at times, but here I really like the consistency of this issue. This issue is one of the better ones. And so the first thing that we're going to do is essentially these are all horror comics, might I add. So your mileage may vary with the material covered, but definitely something covering all of the different aspects of the horror genre. So we've got the body horrors, we've got the thrillers, we've got the slashers, we've got the Hitchcockian style thing, and then also just some off the wall psychotic crazy stuff. And so this first story by Nick Ruby, I'm not as familiar with him as maybe what I should, but he has these very rigorous, very meticulous kind of illustrative line art drawings, kind of reminding me of the old illustrations that would be in newspapers at the turn of the century, or in, say, a Sherlock Holmes short story anthology magazine where there would be some illustrations in there. It's very illustrative and very sort of hyper realistic. And so he or she, Nick, I'm not sure if it's a male or female, is really, really good at giving these shadows, these dark moments, these sort of motifs here with the cupboard doors and with the windows and with the architecture of the building really builds to some sort of barrier between you and the story, and it makes you one sort of sense that there's a barrier between life and death, and this is sort of like a taxidermy story. So you can see kind of where that is going to go. And anyway, it's quite neat, quite good. I very much enjoyed that. The next episode, or the next little story, is by Gyro Lantiga, I think is how you would say the name. And this is about a sort of a found tape, a little bit Blair Witch, a little bit Ed Piskor Red Room, and a little bit The Ring. Kind of, the source material isn't really transcended here, but nonetheless, he does do a really fun job. I quite like this. It is quite creepy. I like the cartoony sort of nature of the art with the cassette realism. So, the technology is kind of like some good 80s sort of to 2000s films. So you can just see here the kind of getting into these videotapes that are passed around, kind of like these bootleg videotapes of various things. If you've seen The Ring, you kind of know what you're in for, and the illustration is kind of what you would expect, and the payoff is pretty good. And once again, these two stories are pretty quality straight out of the gate, which is kind of good for an anthology series, and very different in tone and style, which is also good. One of the other artists who has done a lot of things for Vacuum Decay is a single name person called Carmichael, kind of like Pelé, or the real Brazilian Ronaldo, not the Portuguese Ronaldo. But nonetheless, Carmichael brings a pretty sort of stylistic use of grays in his comic, and this is a black and white anthology, so it does sound kind of silly for me to mention, but he does use the gray tones really well. And he is able to give both confusion and clarity in the same thing. And this is a kind of like quite unsettling story about whether you're not sure if the man depicted here is interacting with puppets and the puppets are out to get him, or if he has had a mental break and the family is real and he is imagining that they're puppets that are out to get him. It's very good. This kind of like gray zone between interpretation is, if you pardon the pun, the shades of gray in here really get into it, and the light on gray compared to dark characters on the black background and vice versa is a really good way of sort of creating tension and creating ambiguity. The next story is another completely different type of story as well. So this is another kind of excellent comic about comics. And on Cult Comic Corner on Tarnished Bronze, we'll be getting into some of these comics about comics. But once again, this is a very sort of cartoony style, something that you would more expect on Garfield or Dilbert, with very kind of plain, but nonetheless, the scene is set, the tone is set, and the expressions are pretty good. And Keenan Michael Keller is another person who's done a few of these Vacuum Decay shorts, and he's back here. There's a lot of good in jokes in this. It's a good change of style compared to the other stuff. The narration is actually engaging. There's quite a lot of story that goes on here, quite a lot of dialogue, if you notice, a lot of captioning. And this is actually quite a fun yet very disturbing little folly here. And he does sell this kind of zombie-esque disintegration really well. So when I kind of the cartooning is a bit more simplistic, but sometimes that's harder to sell than some over-rendered thing. And Keenan Michael Keller does a good job here. Philotico, I don't really remember seeing this guy before, but he has this pretty cool motif throughout this story, where Saint Peter and the gates of heaven are rendered in light. Like, so that's, very little background hashing. You can just see the lady in the clouds here. Some kind of surrealist sort of dialogue, and some, a good sense of humor. And then when we slowly switch. This is just, I kind of thought this was a fantastic trio of panels here. Just the co-chair for Guns for My Jesus, the treasure of the mothers against lesbians and liquor, and the co-founder of Grannies for Spanking Fannies. Just sounds like some really tremendous, off the wall things that are probably sadly real in some places. But then, by contrast to St. Peter's panels, we get the hell panels where everything is dark and the white characters really going through their tumultuous punishments. I think that's a really great technique, and it shows the depths of hell quite well. So Philotico, haven't really seen too much of this guy, but yeah, it does look like it will be entertaining. Nordlinger's own story is very good, very dark, and I actually think that I can see some real improvement in both the pacing and the storytelling and the art. I mean, he's probably been doing this for maybe a couple of years now, at least in Vacuum Decay, as well as some of his other issues. I think there's Death in Springfield is one of his one shots that he's published, as well as another sort of soul author thing that he did with Floating World. But anyway, this is Today You'll Love, Tomorrow the World, and it really gets into the creepiness. It sets the scene really well. It's got some pop culture references. So, what's your favorite Ramone? So there's Mikey, there's Joey, there's Johnny, and Dee Dee Ramone. I think they're the four originals, and Dee Dee is obviously the hardcore OG for the especially the poser set. Joey Ramone is always the cool one. Johnny Ramone is actually the one who put food on the table for all these guys. So he was the person who kind of really made sure that their merchandising and stuff was always good and was keeping them on tour. So I don't know if anyone has ever seen End of the Century, the documentary, but I highly recommend it here. Anyway, back to the issue at hand. Nordlinger is getting really good at just portraying these creepy and bizarre scenes, and it seems like everything is kind of in the world as we know it, but it's a twisted world as we know it, and he is very good at selling you on these sort of childish naivete with a darker undercurrent. It's very satisfying, very dark. He does manage to ratchet up the tension right until the two-page reveal, and he is getting less and less sketchy. So here's this is part of a six-panel thing, but that's the ratcheting of the tension. But this panel is quite exquisite actually, and so really showing the improvement. This is probably a strong story, or my favorite story in this issue of Vacuum Decay, and he's going from strength to strength in a strong issue. This is a strong issue of Vacuum Decay. Number 7 is not a bad one to start with. And the last story is these sort of sketches that harken back to kind of like the golden age of comics. Like there's some golden age looking characters in there. It looks a little bit like a comic strip gone a bit mad. If anyone has seen Earthman from the Power Comics people, kind of reminds me a little bit of that, but just with a bit more modern content, modern sensibility. The story is definitely peculiar and it's a little bit hard to follow. Maybe I'm a bit too basic to understand it, but nonetheless, it is worthy of kind of a read. It does sort of take you into this surreal kind of unsettling story. I couldn't quite make sense of it, but it is very kind of shocking. So that is Vacuum Decay. Overall, I really enjoy these comics. I can't recommend them enough. Definitely get out and maybe try an episode of Vacuum Decay. And the great thing is if you don't like one of the stories, another one is bound to pique your interest. And like I've said, there's 2 or 3 comic creators now who I get their stuff because they did a short story in Vacuum Decay. So thanks everyone for listening. Like, follow, subscribe, and check out some of our other videos. And hopefully we'll be back at some future point for more of the Cult Comics Corner.